for whom he will be appearing, Republican Senator David Perdue of Georgia, coming to us today from Capitol Hill. So, Senator, thank you so much for being back with us. Good to have you.
Good morning, David.
So, you know, I always ask you both as a senator, but also as a former CEO of a big publicly traded company. Is it good news or bad news that the Fed has to keep cutting? Because normally we think that's an indication of a weakness in the economy.
Well, it's hard to generalize about that because let's talk about the U.S. economy. The U.S. economy is doing just fine, thank you very much. I mean, we've added 6 million new jobs since President Trump came into office. So what Chairman Powell talked about yesterday, and we hope to probe on this a little bit more today in the Senate banking hearing, is what are those global cross currents internationally? He talked about the trade concerns, and I understand that, but the long-term implications of these trade negotiations going on around the world have to be tremendously encouraging because to our economy anyway in the United States. So I think what the Fed is concerned about right now is will these cross currents internationally have a negative impact in the next 6 to 8 months over on the U.S. economy.
Are you concerned at all, Senator, that the Fed may increasingly be really turning to the markets to decide what to do rather than to underlying economic data?
Well, I've been concerned about that all along. I don't think the market is a measure of the U.S. economy necessarily. And what I look at is there's plenty of capital in this market. Remember, innovation, capital formation, and the rule of law is what really fundamentally built this economic miracle over the last 75 years on top of a great workforce. So I'm a little concerned that they tend to talk about the markets more than I'll be comfortable with. But you know, so far so good. I think this economy is moving, reacting to freeing up capital on several fronts, the tax bill, the Dodd-Frank bill, and also releasing some of the pressure on regulations here makes our businesses more competitive with the rest of the world, and that's what we see going on right now.
Whether it's the goal or not, as you know, Fed policy will affect the dollar and how strong the dollar is against other currencies. There are reports now to the White House that the president would really like to weaken the dollar. As a former CEO as well as a senator, does that make sense to you?
Well, you know, in these companies that I ran, they were multinationals, so we had to watch FX, foreign exchange, and interest rates around the world, and what people did to arbitrage that. But yes, you know, any sitting president would love to have low interest rates to spur growth. Long term, you worry about the inflationary pressures coming from labor shortages, and right now we have 7.5 million job openings because of the heat in this economy and what we've done, and only 5 million people looking for. So sooner or later, you're going to get some labor inflation pressures. So far, it hasn't been out of the norm, I don't think. But you know, we're watching that here as well.
Well, sooner or later was the interesting phrase there you used, because why is it later? I mean, as you saw, Jay Powell was asked about this repeatedly. He says, I don't know what happened to the Phillips curve. We're not getting the wage inflation, despite the employment level.
Well, I think part of that is you're rebounding from a decade, you know, of low performance here in the economy. And we had the lowest performance under the prior administration in 230 years in American history. So we're rebounding from that a little bit. At some point, though, the dynamics probably have to come back in. Now, the other thing, though, is sitting out there is, are we going to really succeed in this trade negotiation long term? And I believe we will. And if we create a level playing field, we can open up markets for our ag products in the U.S., our manufactured products, and that's what's happening right now is we have a renaissance going on in our manufacturing environment right here in the U.S. So those are the things that I'm encouraged by. The buttons we've pushed are producing the results we wanted, and now the Fed's looking at it and saying, well, let's see what the international pressures are going to do to it.
As the chair appears before you today, everybody's mindful of the fact that President Trump has been rather critical, I think it's fair, of Jay Powell, and he repeatedly says he has the power to dismiss him as chair. Do you believe he does have the power, and would you urge him not to exercise that power?
Well, I certainly would not like to see that today. I don't think it's my role to weigh in on what the Fed is doing. They're an independent central bank. It's served us well that way. I don't want elected officials here in Congress weighing in on interest rate increases or interest rate decreases. What I was worried about over the last few years was the size of the balance sheet, and I'm worried about it. I still worry about that. I worry about the size of the Japan central bank's balance sheet, China's, as well as Europe's. But they all seem to be dealing with that rationally right now.
Although Chair Powell has recently indicated that maybe they might revise or revisit the question of the balance sheet. I mean, at one point we were taking it down, then he said we're going to stop taking it down. Now there's some suggestion maybe they'd go back into increasing the balance sheet. You'd be opposed to that?
Well, I don't want to comment on that, David, but I will say this. I like what they were doing when they were rationalizing to get some normal level that everybody can be comfortable with. What I'm also worried about is the negative interest rates around. I'm not an economist, but as a business guy, that really concerns me in Japan and parts of Europe. And that's another dynamic that's a measure of the fact that you can't generalize about the global economy right now. Our economy is hot. It's doing very well. We produced 6 million new jobs over the last 2.5 years, and the lowest unemployment, as you just said on your show. The thing I look at is we have the highest median income in U.S. history right now as well. So we're watching that. But I really believe that we'll be successful in these trade negotiations in the short term and over the long term. This is definitely the right thing for us to be doing.
As I look at you there in the Capitol building, I'm mindful of the fact that you're going to have a recess coming up in August, and we got a debt ceiling issue that's pending, that's coming up. Yeah. There's a proposal from the administration to sort of put that issue off, to have a continuing resolution for a year, put the debt ceiling issue off. You're against that. Explain why.
Well, number one, it's irresponsible. This is outrageous that the United States government and the United States Congress, we do not, historically, have not funded this government on time. Only 4 times in the last 45 years since the 74 Budget Act was put in place, David, has Congress actually funded the government before the start of the new fiscal year. Right now we have 8 working days between now and this August break, which is a traditional break where senators and congressmen go back to their states, work with their constituents, and it's a work month. Right now, though, we have got to get, I believe, defense and labor, HHS, and education funded before we leave on break to avoid the problem coming back. We only have 10 working days in September. A CR is terrible, David, to the military. It doesn't sound so draconian. It continues spending at the same level we spent last year. That doesn't sound so bad, but it ties the hands of the military, and in this particular case, it would be devastating. It causes costs to go up dramatically, much more than what we're talking about negotiating right now between domestic issues and military issues.
Sounds like you had some negotiating with Secretary Mnuchin to do there, okay? Thanks so much, Senator. Yeah. Really great to have you with us today. It's Senator David Perdue of Georgia.